On April 19, 1993, the sky over Waco, Texas, was torn apart by a massive column of black smoke. A tense 51-day siege, which cost millions of dollars and captured the world's attention, finally culminated in a horrifying tragedy. The Mount Carmel Center, the sanctuary of the Branch Davidians cult, was engulfed in a raging inferno. Inside, 76 lives were turned to ashes, including 25 innocent children who had never truly known the outside world. This devastating scene poses a haunting question for American history. Was this the result of the FBI's incompetence and ruthless abuse of power, pushing zealots into a corner, or was it the inevitable, orchestrated finale of a counterfeit messiah suffering from megalomaniacal narcissism? To understand the flames at Waco, we cannot look solely at the authorities' bullets or tear gas. We must delve into the darkness within the mind of the man who ignited it all, a man who proclaimed himself the embodiment of God. He psychologically manipulated dozens of people, leading them to willingly embrace death rather than abandon him. Who was he, and how could an insignificant individual build a psychological empire so impenetrable that even the FBI was rendered helpless? Long before becoming a symbol of death, the man worshipped at Waco was simply Vernon Howell, a boy born into a broken family in Houston, Texas. Vernon had a tumultuous childhood. He suffered from dyslexia, struggled academically, and eventually dropped out of high school. He carried a deep psychological wound from his father's rejection, masking his insecurities with an intense passion for music. Vernon dreamed of becoming a rock star, strumming his guitar with a desperate hunger for the crowd's adoration and devotion. However, Hollywood and the music industry coldly rejected him. This earthly failure triggered a dark turning point in Vernon's mind. Unable to be a rock idol, he found another stage where manipulation was much easier: religion. By obsessively studying the Bible, Vernon began to mold a new identity. He erased his failed past and adopted the moniker David Koresh, a calculated combination of the great King David of Israel and King Cyrus, Koresh of Persia. This was not merely a name change, it was a psychological rebirth, a defense mechanism designed to transform a failure into an untouchable, divinely ordained messiah. David Koresh's path to power was a perfect blueprint of manipulation and calculated violence. When he first joined the Branch Davidians at Mount Carmel, Koresh was merely an obscure apprentice. But with the sharp instincts of a predator, he quickly seduced the aging female leader, Lois Roden, using her as a stepping stone into the inner circle of power. When Lois passed away, a war of succession erupted between Koresh and her son, George Roden. This was not a battle of faith, but a purge driven by megalomaniacal egos. Koresh employed a divide-and-conquer strategy, utilizing his charisma and exceptional ability to interpret the Bible to sway disgruntled followers. The climax of this rivalry was a shocking shootout at Mount Carmel, where Koresh and his loyalists used firearms to assert their dominance. Although tried for attempted murder, he used his relentless psychological manipulation in the courtroom, resulting in a mistrial. This legal acquittal became a miracle in the eyes of his followers. The successful coup marked not only a physical transfer of power but also the complete subjugation of the cult's will. From that point on, the Branch Davidians ceased to be a religious organization and became a mere instrument serving Koresh's ego. Once his power was consolidated, David Koresh began to reveal his pathological true nature through what he called the doctrine of New Light. This was a masterpiece of brainwashing psychology, meticulously designed to completely strip followers of their autonomy and physical needs. Koresh declared himself the sole prophet capable of deciphering the 7 seals in the Book of Revelation. With this self-appointed divine authority, he issued a horrifying decree: all marriages within the cult were annulled. All men were forced into strict celibacy, while Koresh claimed the sacred, exclusive right to be the only man permitted to procreate to establish the House of David. The depravity did not end there. He blatantly took married women and underage girls, some as young as 10 years old, as his spiritual wives. From a criminal psychology perspective, this is a classic cult manipulation tactic, dismantling the traditional family structure, severing the bonds between spouses, parents, and children, so that all affection, dependency, and loyalty are redirected toward a single figure, the leader. Koresh successfully weaponized faith to satisfy his lust and his insatiable desire for absolute control. David Koresh's megalomaniacal dream could not be complete without the backdrop of the apocalypse. To maintain his power and the awe of his followers, he constantly indoctrinated them with visions of an imminent, catastrophic war against Babylon, his term for the United States government and the outside world. Fear was utilized as a psychological glue, binding the believers ever more tightly to the Mount Carmel center. What was once a peaceful religious commune was rapidly fortified into a militarized stronghold. Under Koresh's direction, the Branch Davidians amassed a massive arsenal, including hundreds of semi-automatic rifles, parts to illegally convert them into fully automatic machine guns, thousands of rounds of ammunition, and large quantities of explosives. This militarization was not merely a physical preparation, it marked a dangerous cognitive shift within the cult, transitioning from passively waiting for God to actively embracing a martyr complex. By transforming his followers into holy warriors ready to die for him, Koresh stripped away their final remnants of humanity. He cultivated an environment of collective paranoia, where dying in a bloody confrontation with the FBI was perceived as the only path to salvation, paving the way for the irreversible tragedy. On the morning of February 28, 1993, the quiet atmosphere of the Texas plains was torn apart. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, launched a massive raid on the Mount Carmel compound. They carried a search warrant for illegal weapons, but what awaited them was not docile surrender, but a deadly hail of bullets. This was no ordinary raid, it was the beginning of a horrific tragedy. David Koresh had known about the raid in advance and prepared everything. In Koresh's paranoid mind, this was the exact fulfillment of Revelation, the final battle between God's people and the sinful forces of Babylon. Deafening gunfire echoed continuously for nearly 2 hours. For ATF agents and 6 Branch Davidians fell in pools of blood. From a criminal psychology perspective, this moment was a deadly turning point. Koresh resoundingly succeeded in turning a law enforcement action into a bloody holy war. He used the blood of the martyrs to solidify the fanatical beliefs of the remaining followers, proving that his apocalyptic prophecies were absolutely correct. The ATF's disastrous raid had inadvertently handed David Koresh his most powerful psychological weapon, the role of a victim persecuted for his faith. Following the bloody shootout, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, stepped in, launching a 51-day siege and psychological war, one of the most tense and haunting standoffs in American history. The FBI's plan was to use psychological warfare tactics to break the will of those inside the compound. They cut off all power and water, shined blinding spotlights at night to deprive them of sleep, and blasted loudspeakers with high-intensity, eerie sounds like rabbits being slaughtered, harsh music, and screaming children. However, the FBI underestimated the level of fanaticism and the absolute mind control of David Koresh. To a cult that constantly believed in the apocalypse, these actions were not torture, but exactly the test of faith from the devil that Koresh had predicted. Koresh used the Bible as both a shield and a weapon, constantly preaching over the radio, turning every FBI tactic into clear proof of the outside world's evil. He manipulated even the expert negotiators, skillfully stalling for time with endless biblical sermons and false promises of surrender. In reality, Koresh had no intention of stepping outside, he was setting the perfect stage for the bloody apocalyptic finale he had always craved and obsessed over. By April 19, 1993, the FBI's patience was completely exhausted. The prolonged negotiation efforts fell into a deadlock, and pressure from the public and government officials weighed increasingly heavy. The final decision was made: use force to end this enduring standoff. Armored tanks were ordered to drive straight into the Mount Carmel compound, smashing through the flimsy walls and pumping massive amounts of CS tear gas inside. The goal of this tactic was to force the Branch Davidians, especially the women and children, to succumb and flee outside. However, the FBI once again tragically miscalculated the psychology of a fanatical cult. Instead of fleeing in panic from the dense toxic gas, the followers retreated deeper into windowless bunkers, donning gas masks and clinging to each other in the blinding darkness. To them, the massive tanks tearing down their walls were exactly the iron monsters depicted in the Book of Revelation. The FBI's heavy-handed move pushed David Koresh into a corner, but simultaneously allowed him to fulfill his paranoid doomsday script. He had no way back, and he decided that his loyal flock wouldn't either. No one stepped outside, they all gritted their teeth waiting for a miracle from God, or an ultimate and eternal destruction. Around noon on that fateful day, a fire suddenly erupted at multiple points within the compound. Within minutes, the strong winds characteristic of Texas fanned Mount Carmel into a massive inferno. The horrific scene was broadcast live worldwide, raging flames swallowing the entire wooden building along with dozens of lives trapped inside. Firefighters were unable to approach the scene due to the risk of unexploded ammunition. When the fire burned out, all that remained was blackened ash and an ultimate human tragedy. 76 people, including 25 innocent children, perished tragically in the blaze. Subsequent forensic evidence and audio recordings pointed to a chilling truth: the fire was not an accident or caused by exploding FBI tear gas. David Koresh and his most trusted lieutenants had deliberately poured gasoline and set the fires. It was a meticulously calculated mass murder-suicide. Koresh chose death in the sea of fire to purge their sins and enter eternity with his followers. In his final moments, he ruthlessly demonstrated the absolute power of a cult leader, granting himself the right to decide the life and death of dozens of people. The ashes of Mount Carmel not only buried David Koresh and the Branch Davidians but also left a deep, haunting scar in modern American history. Waco permanently became a dark symbol, a bloody cautionary tale about the dangerous intersection of religious freedom, fanatical ideology, and government overreach. However, Waco's most brutal legacy was sparking a new generation of anti-government extremists. The shocking images of military tanks attacking a religious compound became the igniting spark for right-wing militia movements. Exactly 2 years after the tragedy, on April 19, 1995, Timothy McVeigh bombed the federal building in Oklahoma, killing 168 people to exact revenge for Mount Carmel. The story of David Koresh is a classic study of the psychology of a megalomaniacal narcissist. He borrowed the word of God to satisfy base desires, used psychological manipulation to control people, and was willing to burn everything down to protect his divine delusions. The brutal ending of Waco reminds us that the fire of fanaticism, once ignited, will consume everything in its path.